Welcome back to Of Knights and Pilgrims, a podcast about Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene. I'm Christian Leithart.
I'm David Grubbs.
This is episode 8, in which we will be discussing Canto 6. All of our previous episodes are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and presumably elsewhere. Those are the 3 that I have checked.
Presumably.
I use Overcast, personally, and they are on there too. I think it pulls from Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, we would appreciate a little bit of financial support to produce the episodes. They're not expensive, but a little bit goes a long way. I have set up a Ko-fi page. I'll put a link to it in the show notes, and you'll be able to support an episode there. Yay, even this episode or future episodes. We shall see.
Huzzah.
I think that David wanted to add a editor's correction to a previous episode.
Yeah, a couple of things. One from last episode, we were talking about the barking and baying of dogs in the underworld when Duessa and Night approach, and we had a discussion about whether or not the barking of dogs or the baying of dogs was an element when the Sibyl is invoking the underworld deities in Book 6 of the Aeneid.
And I had said that I didn't remember it, despite the fact that I taught the Aeneid just a few weeks ago. Taught that book, in fact.
Yeah, so we looked it up, and in Book 6, after sacrifice to Hecate and Erebus and Night, hey, there she is, Proserpina and the Lord of the Styx, which I guess would be Pluto himself, the ground rumbles, the wooded ridges tremble, and the dogs howled as through the gloom the goddess drew near. So there we go, howling dogs. But Spenser got way more play out of those howling dogs than did Virgil.
And added the owls and the wolves. But I think clearly he had read Book 6 of the Aeneid and was pulling images and ideas from it.
I mean, that is, to me, anyway, that is the spookiest part of the Aeneid. Mm-hmm. You know, the invocation of the underworld deities in the dark of night and blood everywhere.
Well, this podcast is not about the Aeneid, but the way that the different priestesses get inspired in the Aeneid, the Sibyl has this cave with 100 openings in the walls, and the wind is constantly making these voices and noises through the openings, and then they kind of coalesce into this single voice that then it channels through her, and she speaks with the voice of 100 different air tunnels, and that is
terrifying,
so spooky. And the other one in Book 7, this is King Latinus's father's shrine, and in that one, the way that you get the vision is by slaughtering animals and then lying down on their skins and going to sleep, and you get a vision in your dream. But I mean, how difficult on the freshly flayed skins of animals to just take a little nap.
Yikes.
That's what you have to do to get the vision.
Well, it's this notion that the priest, the shaman in this case, has to symbolically enter the realm of the dead in order to see that vision of beyond worldly knowledge.
So this podcast, as much as we love talking about the Aeneid, it's not about the Aeneid. This is about the Faerie Queene. So we're going to talk about Canto 6.
Yes.
Which is, I think, the introduction of one of David's favorite characters in the story. As far as storyline, we spent a couple cantos with Red Cross. This canto, we go back to Una. They're still separated. And we see repeatedly in Book 1 that there's different knights that have different kind of ideas of chivalry or lack of chivalry. And Una encounters most of them. So obviously she and Red Cross were together. They separate. She meets Archimago, who is disguised as Red Cross.
Yep.
She meets Sans Loy. Now she's going to meet a new one in this book. And in the following book, she meets yet another one. And it's just one knight after another who are just, pricking across the plains on their coursers, their palfreys. And in this one, she's still under the control of Sans Loy. He's taken her from the lion, her faithful servant, the lion. He makes the moves on her. At first, he actually tries to be courtly, use his words, and she won't have any of it. So he tries to force her. And then, very similarly to the lion, Una is rescued by some barbaric characters. In this case, they're mythological characters, the satyrs and the fauns. I think we had talked just earlier in conversation about the whole theme of chastity.
Yes.
In really in this canto, somewhat suggested in others, but in this canto, it is everywhere. All the characters have something to do with misguided love or a lack of self-control. And satyrs are famously not self-control in that way.
Yes. Famously lustful.
Yes, lecherous and lustful. And so we see that here. But first we see the man being lecherous and lustful.
Yes.
And the image of, in stanza 6, of even the sun cannot look down on this act. The sun itself, clouds cover the sun at this great crime that's about to be committed when the fawns and satyrs show up. And Sansloy is very afraid of them, more so than of the lion, oddly. And so he scoots away, runs, and gets on his horse, and fast away gan ride. And just like we saw in the previous canto, not the previous one, the last one where Una was the major character, her beauty has a huge impact on those she meets.
Yes.
She's uncloaked, her face is visible, and all of these characters respond in one way or another to her beauty. Sansloy wants to force her. The satyrs and fawns want to worship her. No one can help being impacted by her appearance, her beauty. And there's clearly very allegorical moments here. We really didn't spend that much time talking about allegory in the last episode. In this episode, there's, if you take these forest creatures as sort of like nature, natural law, the lower impulses of humanity, even those kind of gut feelings are receptive to the beauty of truth.
Yeah.
They can't grasp it all, but there's an attraction there. Yeah, do you want to add anything to that?
The little quatrain that summarizes what happens in the canto at the beginning. From lawless lust by wondrous grace, fair Una is released. And the lawless lust, sans loi, is without loyalty, but it's also without law. So he does not govern his lust in the ways that you've said. He doesn't govern his lust. He's also the first to see her unveiled face in this canto. He rips the veil off in the fourth stanza. For to feed his fiery lustful eye, he snatched the veil that hung her face before, then gan her beauty shine as bright as sky, and burnt his beastly heart to enforce her chastity. He is so far from even the proper restraint of untamed nature that he sees her unveiled face, and it makes him even more lustful, even more violent. So that the irony of the opening quatrain, from lawless lust by wondrous grace, the wondrous grace, Una, about to be raped by this lecherous, lusty knight, is rescued by a gang of satyrs.
Yeah.
That's
who are the most lecherous.
Yes. Like it's irony. Sans loi is so far off the mark in terms of what his even natural laws expectations of how he would handle his lecherous urges. He's so off the mark that these kind of mythological embodiments of male sexuality, like even they think he's gone too far.
Yeah.
If satyrs think you've gone too far.
Yeah. You're messed up. There's a couple of linguistic or poetic moments here that are interesting, considering that Una's last protector was a lion. In stanza 7, she's described as the prey of a lion who needs to be drawn out of the lion's claws. So sans loi is the lion there, which is odd because the last thing that happened was he killed her lion protector. And then in stanza 10, she's compared to a lamb who has been snatched by a wolf, and then is saved from the wolf by a lion running at the wolf and scaring the wolf away, but now the lamb is in danger of the lion. So the lion imagery has transferred from sans loi to the satyrs who have arrived, and the lion was her protector, her previous adventure. So it doesn't, I can't imagine it's inconsistent. There's something about the lion figure that keeps moving. I'm not exactly sure what to do with that, other than if we associate the protector with the lion, the satyrs are clearly her new protector. Compared to a lion rushing at her, they are also stunned by her beauty, just like the lion was, and become her sort of escort through the woods.
Did we talk when we were discussing Canto 4? Did we discuss the ambiguity of lion imagery in the Bible? Satan is a lion. Psalm 70, Psalm 73 has not 73. Psalm 22 has the psalmist describing what is a prophecy of crucifixion as like being assaulted by lions.
So the Lion of Judah.
But then there's the Lion of Judah, right? So that lion can mean a good thing and it can mean a bad thing in Scripture. So that when the lion shows up, really and in metaphor, there's a question. Which lion is this?
Well, we also see a similar, again, kind of complicating the allegory. Prince Arthur has a dragon on his head.
Right.
Which is the whole point of the whole plot of the story is Red Cross going to destroy the dragon. And then you find out that the king of Fairyland, or the future king of Fairyland, is wearing a dragon on his head.
Yeah.
And it's so that animals don't seem to necessarily have specific, they've got qualities that can be matched to characters, qualities that characters have, but it's not a one-to-one. A dragon is always wicked, or a lion is always a protector. Yeah, it's an interesting way to use animal imagery, especially in an allegory, which is, like we've commented before, people normally think of it as a one-to-one. This allegorical figure represents this. A lion must represent natural law. In this case, we've got Sans Loy being compared to a lion. And then a few stanzas later, the satyrs are compared to lions. And I think he's playing with the idea of a lion and what lions represent.
This can't be Spenser's source because time is linear, but someone who was influenced by Spenser, and we talked about this in the first episode, was C.S. Lewis. And the ambiguity that you're drawing out there reminds me of the scene in The Great Divorce where you have the character who has a
lizard.
Yeah, the lust lizard hissing in his ear. But when he chooses to die, that lust should be killed, that it is transformed into this fiery, strong, majestic, but controlled steed.
Yeah, it's a horse. Yeah, steed.
And what the animal is shifts. But I think there's something similar going on in Spenser, this idea that these natural urges or natural capacities that the beast represents in the human isn't necessarily an always evil or always righteous thing. The question is, what is the lion doing? What is the dragon doing? So when our attention is drawn to power or capacity by those beast metaphors, or a literal beast rolling up, we then need to be attentive, as Spenser always wants us to be attentive, to the ethical side of the question. How is lion power to be used?
Right, exactly.
Because lion power is a real thing, and it's dangerous. But what does the lion do?
Which, I mean, you see that with, in the last canto, Night uses horses to draw her chariot. And you've got terrifying horses, the famous flesh-eating horses of King Diomedes, and then you have wonderful horses. Horses have qualities that are just inherent to what they are, but those qualities can be used in different ways: speed, strength, things like that.
Good horse, bad horse. Which one is reined in? Which one is trained?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
In stanza 12, this is another way that the allegory, which I love to mention this, that the allegory is complicated. Una, who kind of represents truth, the one true faith. It says that she has late learned what harm to hasty trust ensueth. So she has actually learned something here. She's not rushing to embrace her new rescuer. She's learned to be cautious, which, again, it's like these characters, they will not stay still. No matter what they represent, you've got Red Cross obviously going through this huge character arc throughout book one. But even Una herself, who seems like she would be a fairly static figure, has become wiser through her adventures. I think we talked about in stanza 11 the satyrs come down to worship her, and they have, because they've got deer or goat legs, their legs bend backwards and they have to bow. So they're not really designed for worship, but they feel moved by her beauty to prostrate themselves before her, which I find amusing.
I love this. I love this stanza with the description when the satyrs see her and then begin to pity her, and they're astonished at her beauty, so that they're both pitying her plight and filled with a kind of awe at her person. But in that stanza that you're pointing to, that their frowning foreheads with rough horns eclad and rustic horror all aside do lay. Rustic horror, right? It's just the reminder that the word panic comes from the name of the god Pan, that the arrival of the Pan, or the satyrs as the image of Pan, the arrival of these beasts of the wild is accompanied by a stark and paralyzing terror that robs you of reason.
And horror also etymologically refers to your hair standing up.
Ooh.
So they're also unkempt and shaggy.
Nice.
Too. The rusticness of them has to be cleaned up a little bit.
So they've laid aside their terrifying aspect and gently grinning show a semblance glad to comfort her and fear to put away. So anyway, I just like this, the army of satyrs charges out of the brush, and now they are gently grinning. I don't know if that makes it less creepy.
Yeah, they've never had to do this before. They've got to teach their mouths to smile charmingly.
Yeah, teach their knees to bow and their mouths to smile.
And they start to worship her as she walks down. They're prostrating, kissing her feet. In stanza 13, do worship her as queen with olive garland crowned, playing before her. And then Sylvanus, their ruler, I suppose, the oldest satyr, he's not the same as Bacchus or Pan. They're all sort of represented as different characters in this book. Sylvanus is basically the oldest satyr, kind of the first and foremost satyr in this story. And Sylvanus also is impacted by her beauty. And I think this is one part where that theme of lust and lechery and like misguided love appears again when Sylvanus sees her in stanza 16.
Far off he wonders, Sylvanus wonders, what makes them so glad, if Bacchus' merry fruit they did invent, if they're making wine, or Cybele's frantic rites have made them mad. Are they kind of caught up in the worship of the earth goddess? They, drawing nigh unto their god, unto Sylvanus, present that flower of faith and beauty excellent. The god himself, viewing that mirror rare, stood long amazed, and burnt in his intent. His own fair Dryope now he thinks not fair, and flowy foul, when her to this she doth compare. So his first instinct is to think, oh, I'm a god and she's a goddess, they're bringing me a bride. Mm-hmm. But the longer he looks, the more noble the comparison becomes. First, I'm going to reject these nymphs that previously I was paired with, because they don't compare to her. But the next stanza, the woodborn people worship her as goddess of the wood, and old Sylvanus himself bethinks not what to think of wight so fair, but gazing stood, and doubt to deem her born of earthly brood. Okay, she is not an earthborn goddess. Mm-hmm. She isn't a dryad.
Right.
Or a nymph. Sometime Dame Venus' self he seems to see, but Venus ne'er had so sober mood. She's as beautiful as the goddess of love, but she's sober. Venus is always looking for someone.
Yeah, amorous look in her eye. Yeah.
Yes, she's always got that come hither working. And this maiden doesn't. And sometime Diana he here takes to be, but misseth bow and shafts and buskins to her knee. So she's not she's as beautiful as Venus, but she's not Venus because she doesn't look amorous. Well, who's the non-amorous goddess? Well, Artemis. But she's not dressed like a huntress. She's still resolutely feminine. Mm-hmm. And Artemis's chastity is a rejection of the amorousness of Venus. And this maiden doesn't have that either.
And it's interesting, is having trouble wrapping his mind around this concept that you can be, it's not that you're throwing aside sexuality and love altogether, but that you're reserving it for its proper place.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have a category for that.
No.
What in his experience, it's either lawless lust or complete renunciation of all love, all lust.
It's apophatic theology where you're just, affirming negations.
Yes, I don't. Yeah.
But it's like he's apophatically discovering chastity.
She's not this and she's not that. Yeah. She also arouses envy in the naiads and hamadryads of the wood. They hate her because her beauty outshines them so much, because the satyrs have all lost their interest in the wood maidens. And this is interesting in stanza 19. She's described as the luckless lucky maid, which is just one of those like lines begging for interpretation, I think.
Well, we've read her story. She's gone back and forth. Glad of such luck, the luckless lucky maid did her content to please their feeble eyes.
And she tries to teach them the truth. She says, oh, they're attracted to my beauty. This is an opportunity for me to teach them. And they just can't get it. And it says, when their bootless zeal she did restrain, from her own worship, they her ass would worship fain. So she's like, no, you can't worship me. And they, okay. And what's the next best thing? The white donkey that she rides. So he becomes, or the donkey becomes their god. That's next best.
That's so funny. When she's first introduced to Silvanus, the god himself viewing that mirror rare. And then in the stanza that you were just looking at, dear listener, I don't refer to them by numbers because when I'm looking at it, they aren't numbered. So the one that Christian just talked about,
19.
Is it 19? Talking about the donkey.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, just before that, she's trying to teach them truth, which worshipped her in vain and made her the image of idolatries. So previously, when Silvanus looks at her, she's a mirror. That's really, really interesting. He keeps trying to identify her as a goddess, but she isn't one. The truth is that she is greater than the goddesses, and she isn't a goddess at all. She's a mirror. And the mistake that they're making, she is actually greater than the ones that he compares her to, but she still isn't a goddess.
Right. Because her beauty is drawn from truth.
She's a mirror.
And then we meet Tarzan, essentially.
Yes.
I am reading the Jungle Book to my daughter. And I also, just by pure accident, happened to pick up the first Tarzan book. We have it on the shelf. And I just saw it there and I thought, I'm kind of in the mood for some light reading. And so I started reading it without really thinking that I was basically already reading an older version of the story.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of getting the two characters confused.
Had you read Tarzan before?
No, never.
Oh, wow.
I read John Carter, so I'd read some Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Yay.
And there's some similarities between them. But Tarzan it's quite a book. He's quite a superhero. And so a lot of similarities with Mowgli. It's hard to imagine that Burroughs wasn't influenced by Kipling a little bit.
Yeah.
But we do have this idea of the man raised in the woods who has all the powers of the animals as well as the reason of a man. That is Tarzan, completely. He's got every advantage that comes from living in the jungle, plus the advantage that come from civilization, in that he's taught himself to read and to write English letters. And so our character in this one is named Saturain, and he has an unusual background. He is not a foundling or a changeling like Red Cross is. Instead, he is a half-breed, son of a human mother and a satyr father. I have never really considered what he looks like.
Yeah.
Does he have goat legs, do you think? Or horns? Or is
in my head canon, he has a couple of little horns that
a little bit shaggier than
that fit neatly in his helmet.
Right. He's got little extra holes in the helmet just for the horns.
Like hinges on the horns.
Yeah. So we get his background. Yeah. And I mentioned that this is yet another of the knights that Una encounters. He is not sans loi. He's not without law. But his law is different. He abides by a different law than someone like Red Cross, say.
I think your comparison to Tarzan and Mowgli is incredibly apt, because I think that Kipling's presentation of the wolf ethics in Jungle Book.
The law of the jungle.
Yes, and similar concepts in Tarzan are lineal descendants of what Spenser's presenting here. This idea that in the wild of nature, there is still a kind of ethics that can be derived merely from those who observe how things are made, a law written on the hearts.
And what's interesting about Saturain, which again, I probably would not have picked up on this if I hadn't just been reading the Jungle Book. But one of the most interesting details in the Jungle Book is how Mowgli, purely by being a man, has authority over the animals of the jungle. None of them can hold his gaze. He looks at them and they have to look away. They flinch away from him. And just by being a human being, he is above them.
Yeah.
And you see that with Saturain as well, that his father, the satyr, taught him to not be afraid of the animals. In stanza 24, it says, his trembling hand he would him force to put upon the lion and the rugged bear, and from the she-bear's teats her whelps to tear. And eke wild roaring bulls he would him make to tame and ride their backs, not made to bear. And the roebucks in flight to overtake, that every beast for fear of him did fly and quake. So his woodland father is teaching him these skills. Don't be afraid of the animals. He's brave enough and strong enough to take away cubs from the mother bear.
Usually not recommended.
Right. To ride wild bulls. And then the next stanza, thereby so fearless and so fell he grew, that his own sire and master of his disguise did often tremble at his horrid view. And oft for dread of hurt would him advise the angry beast not rashly to despise, nor too much to provoke. So he's become so strong and rash that even his father, who trained him, becomes worried about his strength. And then continuing on, he begins to trap and yoke in iron yokes, panthers, boars, leopards, tigers, wolves, antelope. And he has this kind of raw strength that he can use to subdue nature, even though nature itself kind of produced him or half produced him. And again, we have the lion comparison that we saw earlier in this canto, because his human mother comes to him and speaks to him, but he won't listen to her.
Yeah.
He's not going to come back to civilization. And yet, he still somehow latches onto this chivalric ideal of being a noble knight when he gets a little older, because he gets tired of being in the forest. In stanza 29, desired of foreign foemen to be known, and far abroad for strange adventures sought, in which his might was never overthrown, but through all fairyland his famous worth was blown. So he desires to go beyond his forest home, like Tarzan, and then he wants to have this chivalric ethic, I suppose. He's riding around looking for adventures in the manner of a knight, and that's when he comes across Una.
The man cub has found man.
Yes, or Tarzan, again. He's, this isn't in the Disney movie, but he discovers his parents' cabin.
Yeah.
And he teaches himself to read with all their books. And and wants to imitate the men he sees in the books. He wants to wear clothes because that's what people do. He wants to be a man. He wants to shave his beard because he wants to look like a man. And he's worried that all the hair growing on his face will make him look too much like an ape, which he doesn't want to be anymore.
Which is two bearded men recording now. We recognize the irony of this.
And he also is affected by her beauty.
Saturain's one of my favorites. One, because of the things that you talked about. I don't think I'd explicitly thought about him in terms of Mowgli, but I had thought about kind of Tarzan comparisons, but I'd never read them next to each other in the way that you've done. Saturain is one of the characters that keeps popping up in other books.
Yes.
So in the later books of the Faerie Queene, or in each book of the Faerie Queene, there's a protagonist knight who represents, or whose journey represents, the virtue that is the theme of the book. But then there are a few who just sort of keep coming back, some villains and some heroes. And Prince Arthur is the one that we expect to keep coming back again and again. He's sort of the overarching protagonist. But Saturain keeps coming back too. And
And you kind of wonder, is there... It's this sort of, it's not a tension exactly, but we kind of go back and forth asking, is Spenser, is he trying to say something about this sort of natural hero, the hero that has arisen from the natural world? Or does he just really like Saturain as the character and just wants him to be part of the other characters' adventures? The allegory seems to sometimes get pushed aside just for the sake of action in the story.
Did you ever read any of the versions of the story of Sir Percival in the King Arthur stories?
I'm sure I have, but it was
Okay.
it was a children's version a long time ago.
So there are many different versions of the story of Percival, but the first one is by Chrétien de Troyes, French writer in the 12th century, I think. And Percival's mother is a widow. Her father, her husband, Percival's father, was a knight who dies in combat, and his elder brothers have all taken up their father's trade as knights, and they also have all perished. And so she retreats to this estate deep in the woods, a home deep in the woods, taking her last son, young Percival. And he is not shown the ways of chivalry. He is never told about the existence of knights. He's left to pretty much do whatever he wants. And one of the early exploits of young Percival is he's sent to guard the cattle, the goats. And one day the servants of his mother see him coming back with the herd, and he's, kind of driving the herd back into the pen. And among them is a wild stag that Percival had seen wandering wild and thought, ooh, this is just a big goat, and has tamed it, has driven it, has forcibly included it in his flock and has driven it back. And so Percival is this kind of wild child. He's this feral boy who then one day encounters knights and is fascinated by them and wants to be one. And he's this sort of self-made feral boy who becomes a knight. And so when I read Saturain, Tarzan, I think this is an anticipation of Tarzan, but maybe also a looking back at Sir Percival as this character who in Arthurian literature means that the noble, chivalrous heart cannot be suppressed. That if you may take the knight out of civilization, but you can take the knight out of chivalry, but you can't take chivalry out of the knight.
Yeah.
In the natural noble heart, it will arise.
And you see people with the trappings of knights who do not have the chivalric heart, like the Sands brothers and Archimago.
Mm-hmm.
So you can wear the knight's armor, you can ride a horse and hold a lance, and even have a flag, but unless you have the heart of the knight, you're not going to be a knight.
And
I love this story. It's very, it's not really historical at all.
And one may have the heart of a knight without being the son of one. And if you don't recall, when we looked at the letter that Spenser wrote to Walter Raleigh, he said that this book, The Faerie Queene, is meant to fashion a gentleman in noble virtue. It's meant to make you gentle, to make you noble. And so here we get to see that contrast of the one who's born noble, who has the title and the trappings, but doesn't have the heart, and the one who's born out in the woods fighting bears. He has the heart.
Right. He still doesn't get the girl, though.
No, he doesn't.
In verse, oh my goodness. In stanza 32, he's very charming. He's very nice, but she still has a heart for Red Cross, and Saturain promises to assist her in finding him. Quickly, they see another traveler. So that they leave the woods and while the satyrs are distracted, and they see a traveler on the road. And the minute it describes him as a silly man and simple weeds forewarn, hopefully you're all thinking, this must be Archimago again. And in fact, it is.
Yep, here he is again.
And of course, silly here does not mean silly in the way that we think of it. It just means simple or rustic. So anyway, they find this old man. Una doesn't recognize him. Maybe he's probably disguised in some way. And he claims he saw Red Cross dead, which we know is a lie. But Una doesn't. They ride off looking for Red Cross's killer. Saturain rides much faster than Una. And so he finds Sansloy. I think he's at a fountain, right? A lot of things happen at fountains in this book.
Well, you got to water your horses.
That's right. So they meet at a fountain. They start fighting, and Una shows up. Sansloy sees her. Well, at first he denies having killed Red Cross. I never killed that guy.
Yeah.
We fought, but it turned out to be it was some old man in disguise. It wasn't even Red Cross at all. And then he recognizes Una. Una flees while the two fight, and we actually end the Canto with the two still fighting. So we dropped Sans Joy off in the underworld, and here, our other Sans brother, we leave fighting Saturain, locked in combat. And we even, the narrator even tells us, but for to tell her lamentable case, that's Una's, and eke this battle's end, we'll need another place.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm out of time. I'm gonna have to tell you later how it ended.
Tune in, same bat time, same bat channel.
So, is there anything you wanted to add about the ending here?
We've been pursuing this notion of Sans Loy and Saturain as opposites, as foils, as the one who has the trappings and the name of a knight, but he doesn't have the heart of a knight. He is worse than a satyr in his lusts and won't take no for an answer, not even when he regards Una's bright face of truth. On the other hand, you have Saturain, born in the woods, son of a satyr, the bear puncher, and yet he has the heart of a knight, pursues chivalry out of desire to live under this internal law. No one can govern him. He governs himself, and he's learned self-governance, apparently
Even though
on
he's
his
still
own.
a little wild. I mean,
He is.
He hasn't dropped his. When his mother sees him in the woods, he's carrying a baby lion.
Yeah, but
a
he's
lion cub.
he's still young at that point.
Right. Right.
He gets a real quick arc in this Canto.
Yeah.
But when he sees Una's face, he is drawn to love and worship and to listen. It says that he learns from her. She teaches him. And even though initially his response is what a knight's is to a fair lady, to woo her, when she says, no, my love is elsewhere, he says, all right, let's find that guy.
Yeah.
So he is the opposite of Sans Loy in about every way he could be.
Yeah. And the opposite of Sylvanas, too, who, like you said, had trouble even getting his mind around the idea that there would be a beautiful woman who was not amorous.
Yeah.
Or completely had put aside love completely. The idea that there was a woman who was in love but not promiscuous. Sylvanas just couldn't understand that. And Saturain, he does recognize that, or at least he accepts it, and he's willing to. Oh, she is in love, just not with me. He's able to process that in a way that the satyrs can't.
I think when you referenced earlier the Jungle Book and Mowgli, because he is a man, the beast will not look him in the eye. When Tarzan realizes that he is a man, the difference that it makes. And Sylvanus can't wrap his head around it, but ultimately Saturain can, because he is part human. There's human in him. He's capable of a dignity and a wisdom, and therefore a self-governance that not even the satyr is capable of.
Right.
And so he then becomes this image of, I think, probably the best that a natural virtue can do. He has not yet been taught by truth, yet he's found much truth in the way that we see he governs himself.
Yeah. It's probably significant that he and Sans Loy remain locked in combat while the story moves on. That complete lack of law and a sort of natural law, neither of them can. This natural law, untutored, cannot actually overcome anarchy. Those two things are always going to be in conflict. You need the actual, you need truth, you need teaching in order to overcome the.
As admirable as he is still not the Knight of Holiness.
Right. Nor is Red Cross, really. I don't think Red Cross would have won.
Well, by grace, he's going to get there.
Right, exactly. And I think all this builds up to the fight with the dragon, of course, which you just see. I mean, it goes on for pages and pages, but all of it's necessary because you see at every point Red Cross kind of passing these tests, various checking off boxes. Oh, that's how he's grown here. That's how he's grown here.
Yeah.
But I think that might be it for this episode. So thank you so much for listening.